Good evening, everybody. As Senior Pastmaster, I welcome you to the Carmen's Lecture for 2020. Each year we take you to an interesting venue to see something different, learn something new, and hear someone special. Today, lockdown means our venue is a virtual world. Our subject is the unknown new world of transport futures, where all our certainties are disrupted, our supply chains stretched to breaking point, our workforce strained beyond measure, our managements strapped for cash to carry, and our uniquely comprehensive service to society changing fast and furious. Our speaker is indeed someone special. For a start, he's a Carmen. He's also full professor in supply chain strategy at the Logistics Centre at Cranfield School of Management. Also, he's immediate past chairman of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, on the board of numerous corporates, and works internationally with pharma, automotives and high-tech. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard Wilding, OBE.
Thank you, Clive, and a big welcome to all the Carmen and their guests. Well, if we're going to look at the future of supply chain, one of the things that we're going to have to do initially is actually to learn from the past and have a look at the past. And I don't want to go too far into the past because we can, of course, learn an awful lot from history. But what I'd like to do is just actually reflect on possibly the recent past. In other words, let's just go back to 2019. One of the things that we have to actually recognise is in that old normal, because as we're going to see, we're going to move through the old normal into what we could call the pre-new normal, and then into the new normal. In the old normal, there were a number of things which were actually taking place. And these things were really quite important in terms of setting the scene for what is happening now and what is going to actually happen in the future. So let's have just a look at some of those things that were characterising the old normal. One of the ways we were describing really transport supply chain is the fact that we were working in what we call a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguity. This is VUCA. And VUCA really is very much a concept of, it comes from the US military actually, but it's really dealing with all these complexities. And what we've seen in recent years, that if you like, this level of volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity has actually been increasing quite dramatically, and this has been going on for some time. So that really is one of the things that was setting the scene for the way that we were having to operate within most transport and supply chain environments. Also, what we were starting to see was that customers were changing. Customers, whether they're using our transport systems or customers who are actually buying goods from stores. One of the things we were starting to find was that customers really wanted things to be basically fun. They wanted everything to be easy and they wanted to be in control. And that has actually led to a number of sort of innovations. For example, if we're just looking at buses, if we look at Reading buses, one of the things that they were starting to find was by putting tablets actually on those buses, connected to the internet. This actually was quite attractive. For some of the buses on their student routes, what they were doing was they were actually changing the seating on the top deck so people could be a bit more communal and so on and so forth. In other words, just making it more fun. Also, we were finding the easy side of things, make it easy to pay. I know locally at my local bus service here in the Midlands, I was amazed because recently I decided to use the bus. I know that is an awful thing to admit, really, because generally, in our local villages and everything, most people will just get in the car. But I decided, right, I'm going to use the bus. And what amazed me was now we have things to make it fun and easy. Easy, first of all, I can actually track the bus. So I don't need to leave my home until I can see that the bus is at a certain point on its route. I can walk to the bus stop and I know precisely when it's going to arrive. So therefore, it is very much easy. I feel as though I'm in control. Also, when I got on the bus, you have contactless payment. So all of a sudden, I'm not running around looking for change and things like that. Now, of course, some of these developments are things which have been going on for a long time in certain areas, but in more rural areas and in some parts of the UK, we haven't got those. So how can we actually make it so things are fun, easy and in control? The same comes when we start to think about our shopping experiences. The bottom line is it fun to go to your local town centre and be really unable to park? Just the hassle of parking. Also, the council decided they're going to charge you for parking, for example. Is that easy? Do I feel in control? Well, not really. So we've got this whole environment that was happening, which was then driving consumers and customers to work and think in different ways. And that, therefore, had sort of set the scene for some of the things which were driving change within the industry. Another really important thing which was actually starting to change the industry is what we call supply chain 4.0. Really, this is looking at using techniques of technology to actually change the way supply chains are operating. And these are actually around a number of key elements. There's actually 9 building blocks, so we'll go academic for a moment. Systems integration, which is a key thing. It's how we integrate computer systems and move them together. Big data and analytics, simulation and virtualization, the Internet of Things, the cloud. So we've all heard about cloud computing, cyber security, and this really is quite critical. We're having to deal with a virus at the moment, as in a biological virus, but actually one of the key things we also need to think about is just sort of virtual internet viruses to protect our systems. The 7th thing is autonomous systems. We have to think about augmented reality as well. So we're starting to see people using techniques in various things to basically augment reality. This, is as simple as vision picking, for example, in some warehousing environments, but also additive manufacturing and 3D printing. Now, these foundational building blocks are then actually starting to sort of change and are really making things very different. And what we're finding in both transport and supply chain operations, what we're doing is we're taking elements of these and combining them. So yes, there's big innovation moving forward in this particular world around these areas, but what we're actually having to do is to actually combine elements. So for example, if I'm looking at supply chain operations, I might have a warehouse where I'm going to have augmented reality. That's vision picking, where people might have like Google glasses on, and the Google glasses sort of enable them to look at an item, and it actually then comes up with what that item is, so they're able to actually pick it better. That might be actually linked in with augmented autonomous systems as well. So we then have autonomous systems which are actually connected with those, and so what we're actually finding is that might be a person walking in the warehouse, but they'll have a remote vehicle following them around as well. All that information might then be sort of connected through the Internet of Things. These are sensors on various devices, equipment, and even people, which is then taking that knowledge up into the cloud, where we're undertaking big data and analytics, and enable us to then actually virtualize and simulate that environment for different situations. So that really was some of the things that we were actually starting to find in the old normal. Just to highlight just a few of the key areas. And so as we move then into the new normal, things really started to change. So as we move into, if you like, this pre-new normal and our new normal, one of the key things we have to reflect on is supply chain strategy and how supply chain strategy is created, or transport and supply chain strategy. The key thing about this is we have to understand how this will work in most businesses, because this will really drive our response to a lot of the challenges which we're currently seeing. The key thing we need to understand, of course, is we have at the top of a business, any business, even a small enterprise, is some sort of corporate strategy, some sort of vision of what you're trying to achieve in a particular market. Below that, you have something called the competitive strategy. And you could argue that the competitive strategy is how you're going to create value for customers. So it's all about how you create value for customers. And the supply chain strategy is all about how you deliver that value to the customers. So if we're thinking about our transport supply chain strategy, it doesn't matter whether you're moving physically the goods, for example, or you might actually be moving people. What we have to think through is what really creates value in that particular market or that particular environment. When I understand that as, a professor of supply chain strategy, for example, when I actually understand that, I can then start designing supply chains and transport systems to provide value to particular customer groups. And that becomes really important. And there's generally 4 key building blocks, which it's an oversimplification, but let's just talk about 4 key building blocks which are there to actually support this. We have to think about, if you like, the process design. We have to think about the infrastructure and equipment design, the information systems design, but also the people, the organisation and the people to achieve that particular objective. So that becomes really, really important when we're sort of thinking through this. So the challenge that we've actually had is all of a sudden, if you think about the world which we're in now, where, in May, we're still in sort of partial lockdown in the United Kingdom, what people are actually valuing, the way you can create value for customers has, you could argue, completely changed. So that is requiring people to think very differently about the way they actually do things. The transport systems for the old normal, as we move into this pre-new normal, we're now being told we've got to socially distance. So all of a sudden, this is creating a challenge. It means our processes need to change. It means potentially our infrastructure and even our equipment may need to change. The information systems may need to change as well, and also what our people are doing, how we actually develop our people and so on and so forth. And this is happening across all sectors. So generally what we've got is a massive change which is taking place. Now, linked to this supply chain strategy, what we actually talk about is something which I often call it the bimodal supply chain. Now, it sounds very, very complicated, but it's not really that complicated. Bimodal. We have 2 modes. We have mode 1. Mode 1 is very much focused on predictability. It's all about the predictable. It's all about efficiency, cost reduction. It's managing predictable swings, inventory fluctuations or demand on transport systems, and focusing on risk mitigation and prevention. That's really what mode 1 is all about. But we've also got mode 2. And mode 2 is, we define as a focus on exploration. It's all about agility. It's speed, it's dynamic, it's iterative. It's strategies for solving the unexpected and adapting to new technologies. Challenge is all companies have to have some mode 1 and mode 2. But if we look at where we were in the old normal, a lot of our focus was very much around the predictable. It was about lean. It was about that sort of cost reduction and that key focus there. That was really typified many sectors. Mode 2 was something which people did, but not in abundance. And what we've suddenly found now in recent weeks, just in the last 10 weeks, a massive switch in terms of the emphasis. So all of a sudden now we're having to think about exploration. We're having to think about this agility, this flexibility and everything else. The challenge for us as supply chain and transport leaders is the fact that it requires us to actually think differently, and it requires us to have a different skill set in this new world. So that really has actually started to create some sort of changes in terms of what's going on. And we've seen that supply chains and transport systems are having to adapt rapidly, and all of those areas of the processes we're utilizing, the infrastructure, the equipment we're potentially going to be using within these environments, information systems are also going to be, challenged and moved, and also what our people are doing. That is all changing within this sort of environment we're working in. And that, in a way, is also leading us to think differently about what a physical product is or what a service is. And we're starting to find new concepts. We talk about, for example, servitization, which is an innovation of an organization's strategy from products to offering solutions, because we want solutions now in terms of what's going on. And we're seeing all sorts of things happening. For example, Nespresso, the coffee machine, coffee manufacturer. Are they coffee manufacturer or are they supplying actually a beverage? But they have now Bluetooth connected coffee machines, which I find a little bit strange. But it means that you can turn on your coffee machine within 10 meters of the coffee machine. Why you want to do that, not quite sure, but it does give you an advantage on getting your coffee machine warmed up before it suddenly goes, as you approach it to put the pod in. I guess that's what it's about. But the point is that if you're thinking about, that, it's connected now. It's part of the Internet of Things. It talks to your phone. Oh, and guess what? Nespresso also have an app. Right, so you can now order the coffee. So you know how much coffee you're drinking. You now know how much to order. But actually it's gone a step further now, because they have a subscription service. So all of a sudden what you're able to do now is potentially you can use your coffee machine, and the coffee machine automatically orders you the new the coffee that you're actually using. So all of a sudden, you as a human are taken out of this process. You just set it up and the coffee comes to you. You don't have to worry about coffee anymore. And we're seeing that with printers as well, with print cartridges. So Hewlett-Packard are doing similar sorts of things. So we're finding these new ways in which value is being actually created. So all that was very much part of this new normal. But what's happened in the last 10 weeks is COVID-19 has created probably the biggest burning platform in modern history to create change. So all those things which we've been talking about so far, all of a sudden this burning platform has actually created, and it's forcing individuals and businesses to adapt rapidly. So, I'm seeing this all over the place. We're seeing now brewers who are suddenly making hand sanitizer, automotive filters, sound deadening material companies are suddenly going, hey, we can use these to make, personal protective equipment, for example. We're finding, high-end perfume makers making hand sanitizers. So people are understanding their capabilities, and then they're using those capabilities to actually offer another service. And we're finding this across the whole of the industry. But what it is also doing is creating big challenges. So going back to what I said, fun, easy, in control. Is going shopping at the moment with social distancing actually fun? Well, no, I'm finding it personally, it's a little bit of an ordeal, It's sort of running the gauntlet. Do I really want to do that? So of course what everybody's doing is they're switching to online. But one of the challenges with online delivery is the fact that the cost to serve in those environments is incredibly high. And it could be argued that, many retailers are actually losing money on that. What we're also finding in our transport systems is, once again, cost to serve. We've built a model that has been built around the fact that we can get full capacity on aircraft, full capacity on our trains. And if we achieve that, we start to actually make money and it becomes worth doing. And what we're finding now is we're being forced in this pre-new normal to actually socially distance, manage things in a different way, and so on and so forth. So one of the big challenges we have is this concept of cost to serve. And we're already seeing some of the big supermarkets, they're putting in more online delivery. but it's costing them, vast sums of money to do it. And guess what? We're seeing their share prices drop. Why is that? Because everybody who's sensible can see all of a sudden their operating costs are going through the roof. But is this actually creating any additional revenue for them? Probably not. And this is one of the challenges we have. The jury is very much out on on whether online grocery deliveries is actually making any money for anybody. So we have to think differently about how we're doing things. And we are seeing some strange innovations occurring. I don't know if you've noticed Morrison's food boxes. Love them. I got my VE Day afternoon tea food box. So this is Morrison's supermarkets. What they're doing is they're doing a box of food. They tell you more or less what's in it, but there's some flexibility in that. Now, all of a sudden that makes the supply chain, the logistics system easy. What they're also doing, though, is they're actually packaging it so it can go through the courier network rather than having to use dedicated grocery delivery vans. Dedicated grocery delivery vans really are quite complex things because you're having to carry chilled food, ambient food, frozen food, and also you're having to carry hazardous materials. That's your household cleaning products, bleach and things like that. So, I've been talking a lot to delivery drivers over the last few weeks. If I talk to, say, some of the big supermarket delivery drivers, what we actually find is that they're saying, well, I'm doing about 15 deliveries per shift maximum. So that's if you're looking at your Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrison's. If their van's coming out, they're doing 15 deliveries per shift. That's a 5-hour shift. Okay. And I then talked to my DPD driver who's delivering those Morrison's food boxes. Do you know how many deliveries he does in his shift? Anything between 120 and 180 deliveries, because it's a standard box. He delivers it, drops it outside your front door, and off he goes. So he's able to actually, really, the productivity is so much more for him. And of course, that therefore means the cost to serve is much, much lower. So therefore, if you look at that particular product, it's quite interesting having supply chain friendly products. You're able to move them through very quickly. So cost to serve becomes really important within this whole area. But let's think about some of these other drivers which are actually occurring. We've now got a situation where, for example, flights, we can't fly, right? Most of the aircraft fleet is now grounded. Now that presents a whole new set of challenges, because we have to remember that if we look at commercial airlines, the business model is built around the fact that you have people upstairs, a few bags downstairs, and then you have a load of air freight. And what's happened is with, the grounding of all the passenger aircraft, for example, is now air freight costs are going up dramatically. So that is actually going to have an impact on all of us, because, all of a sudden having, for example, blueberries at, which are being flown in from other parts of the world, that may not happen. So, we might not be having strawberries at Christmas because all of a sudden the cost to serve has increased because, air freight costs have gone up by 600% in some markets. So all of a sudden these costs are starting to hit us in different ways. So cost to serve is something we're going to have to very much reflect on. And from a transport perspective, bus companies, rail organisations, supply chain organisations, cost to serve is going to receive incredibly new focus in the future, because we can't afford to do some of the things that we've been doing in recent times. Now, all these drivers have also created some big changes. We've seen this pandemic, really things seem to be, we've got trade wars developing, we're hearing lots of rhetoric between different countries, even countries within the same unions like the European Union. People aren't having a sort of a single approach. This is creating all sorts of challenges. And therefore what companies have been doing, and they've been doing this over the last few years, but this has just accelerated things, is they're starting to nearshore, particularly in the supply chain environment. So it's they're trying to nearshore or bring products back more locally. Now, what's interesting about that is that has big implications for the environment, and some of those are very positive implications for the environment, but also one of the things which they're actually starting to do is it can have a big impact on profitability as well. So, we're starting to see that, people are starting to see a big impact on the environment. Profitability is being sort of, that cost to serve equation is being changed. But one of the things we mustn't overlook is also our impact on society, the people around us. And I think this becomes really important. So, just one example from actually a couple of years ago. Nike, the sports goods manufacturer, basically announced that they were going to be installing 1,200 new automated machines. These are additive manufacturing machines or 3D printers. They'd found a new way of making trainers so that they could 3D print these trainers. Now, 1,200 automated machines, they said, they're nearshoring. So in other words, they're going to put these local manufacturing units in the markets where the customers are. So you might have one in the UK, one, maybe in Central Europe and so on and so forth to actually do these things. That's actually going to reduce their shipping expenses. They don't need to ship things around so much. It's going to actually help them with import duties and overproduction costs because lead time is going to be reduced from 60 days using their more global supply chain to around about 10 days. 30% fewer steps within the process as well, so this is going to reduce costs. But one thing they mention is they anticipate 50% less labour within that particular environment. Now, that's interesting because their current model is 1 million workers in over 566 factories, 75 distribution centres, 30,000 retailers in 190 countries. 1 million workers. So what this supply chain model or structure is going to do is mean that 500,000 people could potentially not be doing the work they were doing before. And I think that this is one of the things that we're starting to see. We've discovered that, for example, in a warehouse, the most vulnerable thing is the physical, the people workforce, right? So how can we make a warehouse which doesn't need people? We have the technology to do that now. We've had it for a number of years, but this has created this burning platform. So we're going to see big increases in these technologies, those elements of supply chain 4.0 which were increasing quite rapidly over the last 2 years. Now this burning platform of COVID-19 is actually changing things dramatically. And that's why I say that when we come out of this, we're not going to go back to the old normal. We're going to come into a new normal. And before that, we have this pre-new normal where we're trying to actually work out what's going on and fit the old way of working into this new world. But actually, we're going to have to develop a completely new way of working for the new world. So we have to think through that actually, when we're making these decisions, we have to think through about profitability. We have to think through the planet and the environment. And don't forget, we've still got net zero 2050 on the agenda. Really important agenda. And we're starting to see that this is starting to change as well. But we mustn't forget the people and the planet, as the people, and society as well. So profitability, the economic impact of our decisions. We mustn't forget the environmental impact of our decisions, but also people and society. And even in the UK, if everybody decides to shop online and never goes into their town centres again, our town centres are going to probably die. So we need to sort of think through how we manage the future and how we support things for society. So in conclusion, I've been talking long enough already. There are going to be some significant changes. We're already seeing the pre-new normal starting to come about. We're going to be seeing the new normal coming in place. But the seeds for the new normal have been there already. But as I said, what we've found with COVID-19, that has just put a burning platform underneath things. There are lots of things that we could have talked about in a lot more detail, but I think it's appropriate now to go to Zoom. So do get yourself a drink and think through some questions and things like that, because we're going to be able to take this in an interactive way onto the Zoom platform. So any questions or comments, and let's have a great discussion. I'm going to get my drink. I'm actually going to be drinking here. Here's my little promotion here. Chapel Down Bacchus. Absolutely cracking wine. Also really resilient supply chain because it's from the UK, so it's only just down the road, so nice short supply chain, doesn't have to cross any borders, which is great news. So I recommend that everybody tries this, and also I just hope that, I often say that innovation is taking ideas which are new to you and creating economic, social or environmental value. So if you have time to reflect on some of the things which I've said, I do hope that you're going to be able to actually innovate and create more value for our economy, our society, and also for the environment that we live in. This is quite interesting because when you start to look at, say, the impact on the planet, if we all have home delivery, it's actually quite good. There was some research done in Heriot-Watt University which actually showed you can have 20 missed deliveries before you create the same CO2 of you getting in your standard, internal combustion engine car and driving to the shops. Right, so the amount of grams of CO2 being created by you doing that little trip to the shops to go and buy that item is 20 times more than if you get it home delivered. So big thumbs up for the the environment in terms of home delivery, you could argue. Profitability, as I've explained, the jury's really still out on this. Some people are making some money, some people just aren't making so much money. But then think about your local community. What is going to happen to our high streets and everything else? And this is a decision we have to make as a society. And I think one of the things that we have to also recognise is there's absolutely no such thing as free delivery and free returns. And this is something which, we really need to address in everybody's minds. At the end of the day, it costs money. I work on a rule of thumb of about 20%, 20% of sales value, ballpark figure. So if you're buying something from Amazon for £20, it's probably going to cost about £4 to deliver it. If you're returning it, you multiply that by 3, and this is a big thing which is going on, the return supply chain. And we have to think through that some of the items being returned, it's incredibly difficult to do that. Just one little example. Asda, my next door neighbour, is in he's had cancer, and therefore he is in total lockdown, and so everything's being delivered to him. So the Asda delivery came and they had the wrong bottle of wine. He ordered one thing and they'd substitute it for something else. And this for him was total devastation. He says, why not do I want to drink that? Anyway, the deal was, the delivery driver said, just phone them up. Don't worry, they'll refund your money. And he says, well, what am I going to do with the bottle of wine then? He says, well, that's up to you. You can give it away if you want to. So, if you think that grocery delivery, it's around about, they make about 3% on groceries in terms of margin. They've now just given away a bottle of wine. All their profits gone on top of the home delivery. This is some of the madness we've got. And that's why this current model is probably not going to be sustainable in the future unless we do things very differently.
Because the high street, the local shops, as we know them, can't possibly compete because the supermarkets haven't closed. They've kept going. We've had a question from Richard. Part of the problem the supermarkets had is product availability was due to the lean supply chain. Moving the product back up the chain reduces costs. Hence, the unexpected peak took a while to recover. Do you think changes will be made?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. For example, if you want me to design a
a supply chain that can cope with 100% of the demand at any time, and have, you know, the ramp that we have due to the pandemic, and, you know, we can just do it. Yeah, we can do that. We can design a supply chain to do that. Problem is back to cost to serve. You know, are we willing to have the high levels of wastage, the high levels of everything else? And ultimately, you're going to have to pass that price on to the consumer. So, you know, we talk about having lean, you know, the danger of a lean supply chain. Well, the lean supply chain, you could argue, is set up for an environment where we as consumers want low cost and so on and so forth. And if, for example, you know, we're willing to sacrifice that, and they turn around and say, okay, folks, if you want toilet rolls on the shelves, guaranteed 365 days of the year, no matter what panic occurs, we can do that, but your toilet rolls are going to cost you, say, 2 to 3 times more. Are you willing to pay?
Yeah.
You know, because we're already operating on service levels of, you know, say 96% plus. So that means that, you know, 4 times out of 100, we might not be able to get what we want. And that's what we saw. We saw the 4 times out of 100 occurring all in one big chunk, you could argue, on a load of products a few weeks ago.
I'm going to do a Piers Morgan on you now. Okay, are you ready, Richard?
Okay.
Not keen on Richard's early denigration of bus use, but surely public transport is helpful for the 2050 emissions threshold. However, as a result of the pandemic, it's to make people reluctant to use public transport. How do we square the paradox?
Yeah, and I need to apologise to all Carmen and everybody involved in the in that. I sort of said that, and I realised somebody is going to have me on this one. So I was expecting a beating on it. It really, well, I mean, we're just seeing at the moment, this is an absolute incredible challenge. We're seeing the fact is that we have to be able to move forward with public transport. Somehow we've got to get cars off the road, and we've got some really interesting paradoxes occurring. I mean, for example, plastic bags and plastic. Hey, guess what? You know, I went out and had this is quite funny actually. I had a disastrous shopping trip to, shall I name them? Tesco, that was it. Click and collect. So I had a click and collect, you know, I've managed to get a click and collect slot. So I turn up, turns out that there was a problem with their payment system. So what then happened was I had to go into the store and they had to rescan all my food, repack it all in plastic bags and everything else, and then roll it out to my car and put it in. So, you know, my wife and I sort of said, well, what was the point of that? So we're starting to see some paradoxes. One, we're being encouraged to use our own cars. Well, we've been discouraged from that for years. We've been encouraged to get rid of plastic bags and so on and so forth. But now we're actually starting to see that actually plastic gloves and so on and so forth, people are actually needing these as, you know, part of personal protection. And also it's thinking about the supply chain to make it secure in this environment. Now, I think in terms of thinking about mass transport, we have got some significant challenges and we need to work through how that occurs. And I don't believe that the current pre-new normal state can stay in place too long. I just know from people who are, you know, working in you know, bus companies and so on and so forth, it is absolutely crippling at the moment, the current situation, and, you know, looking for some hope in that way of how we're going to do it. And I think we need to think very innovatively about how we are going to be able to create these environments and continue to use these services. Same challenge, of course, with flying, and we're starting to see that. Yeah,
you're getting lots and lots. I mean, fantastic reaction. Improvements in productivity levels in the UK are the worst levels since the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago, and the current crisis is expected to reduce this further by at least 20%. Is this because of poor management and leadership, or a lack of initiative and agility? Or is there a fear of change and unwillingness to take risks?
Okay, I think that the biggest challenge has been the unwillingness I think it's the people. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, and you're trying to pin down, we've done quite a lot of research on supply chain management in the boardroom, for example, and managing change, big supply chain change projects. One of the things that continually comes out is it's not the technologies, it's generally the people and the cultures which are actually really proving very challenging within these environments. It's interesting because I've been talking to a number of very large organizations, and they've been looking at the way that they've been working. And some of them are already seeing some massive improvements in productivity, because they've had to basically work out a way of doing things differently. And they're actually saying, we found on this particular thing, we've got a 25% improvement in productivity on that process, for example. If you're looking at, say, payroll processes, one organization, 45,000 employees, they are having to manage their payroll remotely. So they've suddenly discovered, that out of necessity, they've been able to put in place the processes that enable them to work in a completely different way. They're saying this is incredibly efficient. They don't need, the original, if you like, manpower, but it's technology enabled. And one of the things that we are starting to see is, for organizations, we've got to think as well, there's really three things being traded off here. You've got the HR, we've got to look at the human resources, how we manage the human resources. We've also got the technology management side of things, so the IT side of things. But also, really importantly, we've then got the property side of things. So if you're just thinking about, your big head office in London, well, hang on a minute. We've now demonstrated that we can do an awful lot of things remotely. So why do we need the big head office in London if we don't need to have all those people going into the centre of London to do it? Now, that's not saying you get rid of it, but it will change its use. We're going to find that the space that we originally had is going to be changing. So, and it's the same in warehousing. It's the same in all our property. We're going to start seeing those areas changing. Now, the other challenge, though, we've got is HR, human resources. How, as a leader, do you motivate and manage your employees when they're all working remotely? I honestly believe some leaders will be able to make that change. Others will not. So if you think about, in some environments, very much command and control environments, in terms of the form of leadership, having somebody shouting at me through Zoom is really, well, so what? It might be slightly unpleasant, but it's not as unpleasant as you being in front of me. So we're going to start seeing some real changes. And I think what we're going to see is an increase in what we call collaborative leadership and shared leadership. So as a leader, what we're going to have to do is start engaging, if you like, the skill sets of other people within the organization, and enabling them to, basically being empowered to actually lead on particular things and so on and so forth. And so we're going to see some real big changes on that area there. Did I answer the question? I'm not sure if I did.
Yes, you did indeed. Mark Carrington asked, if you estimate the delivery cost is 20% of sales value on home delivery, what do you estimate the overhead percentage of sales cost is within the conventional shops? Yeah, that's a good one for you. I thought you'd like that.
What, mental maths? You'll have to go through the sum again.
Well, I just thought I'd throw that one at you, because why not? You're drinking your chapel.
Yeah, I am. It's Friday afternoon. I can't concentrate on Friday afternoon.
There was a question from Michael Woods, but I think you've already about Zoom and meeting. I mean, I'm doing hundreds of meetings on Zoom now. And my daughter, who works for quite a big transport company, she's working from home and has done for the last 6 weeks. But actually does say she misses the office environment. She misses the chats between, and that's quite difficult. Alan Waller asks, COVID-19 has created rapid change and innovation. This releases potential for a new mindset where radical change that has been long overdue can now move forward with positive support and little resistance. Barriers to change are traditionally 80% people related. You did talk about that.
Yeah, Alan and myself, we've worked on some of these research projects together, so I'm pleased he's getting this in.
Which is fantastic. I'm sorry for some of those that are putting the messages through. I'm kind of whizzing whizzing through them as fast as I can and picking up. What do you think that, following on from sort of Laura, my daughter, what do you think the impact on the office is going to be? I mean, do you think it's ever going to go back to the norm?
It's the norm as we know it. I have to basically say I don't think we're ever going to see that normal occurring. I think what we're going to start seeing is at the moment, if I'm in the office, I'll say I'm working at home tomorrow, and I'll tell my colleagues I'm working at home tomorrow. I think it's going to be the other way around. I think we'll be telling our colleagues I'm working in the office tomorrow. See what I mean? I think there's going to be a change of emphasis, which is actually going to take place in terms of how people sort of view their work. In terms of I did some work, believe it or not, in 1999. I actually found the paper. If you're really sad and you want to go to the Cranfield website and you look under my publications, you'll find something called virtual teaming in the agile supply chain. Now, that sounds very complicated, but this was actually done in 1999 because one of the things which was happening at that time, we were just starting to get, what you could call it broadband. It wasn't fiber or anything like that, but what that meant was on engineering projects, you'd have engineers in Europe, in the USA and everything, collaborating on an engineering project, a design project, really doing something which we can all do now, and that's basically share a screen and they can both work together on this. And what we were looking at there was how people actually acted and what needed to actually take place. Because what we found was that if you just threw people together so that they were literally just, hey, design this on this shared screen, it really didn't work because there wasn't that personal interaction. So what we actually found was that one of the key things you had to do was to get these people together at certain times. But when you got them together, it wasn't meant to be a work meeting. It was other things. So it's like, right, we're all coming together. We'll have a little bit of a chat about work, but 80% of it will be about, let's have a barbecue. Let's go sailing together. Let's do this. It was more about that team building. So then when you went onto the online, you actually had, some sort of relationship there that you were able to, sort of plug into. You could sort of say, how's your family? How's your wife? Remember that day when we were sailing and that happened? They had that common bond. And I think that what we're going to start seeing is that, also, my wife, she's really struggling because, she totally admits that she goes to work. A big element of her work is the social side, actually being with people. And now she struggles with, you've got the Zoom, you're talking to the people and everything, but actually she just wants to be able to sort of meet up. Yeah. So
it's fascinating when you're talking about the 600% increase on freight on aircraft. That's huge.
That was going in. That was actually around Australia. They were picking up on that, so that was quite interesting.
So one of the things that would worry me, because there was a report yesterday, the BBC sort of saying let's all book our holidays, and a Calder was on there going, yeah, it's quite safe. But I mean, most aircraft, it's that recirculating of air, isn't it? Goodness knows how that's ever going to work.
Well, Graham, I'm not an expert on ventilation. I think these are all the sort of questions that the airline industry are going to have to do. But I mean, one of the things is that they'll do, I do know as an engineer, that a lot of the recirculating, it actually reduces the cost of flying because they're not having to run certain compressors and everything else. So what they can do is you can bring in an awful lot more air, as it were, fresh air from the outside, but it has to go through certain systems to compress it. So one of the tricks which they were learning to do was on certain flights was you'd get it there and you'd recirculate the air because then you didn't have to run all these other compressors and things like that. So I think that might be part of it. So I think there are opportunities for the airline industry to actually control the the atmosphere, and I think we're going to see that as well. I mean, we're possibly. I haven't been into London in recent weeks, but I assume that potentially on the tube, one of the things they might do is have all the windows open on the tube trains, just so you've got more ventilation going through, and so on and so forth. It's the same principle on anything we will do. Maybe that's the solution to our bus companies. open top buses and coaches. I know a few Carmen who have got those, so we better bring those in service so we can all sit in the winter in the rain and
get them to drive under a few low bridges. Yeah, change those. We're on Zoom, and I know a lot of people are scared of Zoom, but I absolutely love it. I think for my industry, it's an absolute lifesaver for my industry. But you did mention cyber security. I mean, that's something that's vital, isn't it? I mean, we're all scared of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, one of the things I was talking about in August 2019 was I was trying to educate companies around cybersecurity, because some of the biggest disruptions to supply chains which actually occurred in 2019 were actually cyber attacks on their supply chain systems. So if you think that McDonald's, one of their key supply chain partners, had most of their systems taken out. You look at, for example, Target, the big US retailer, they got actually hit through a supplier of heating and ventilation equipment. So what we have to understand is that competition is not between individual companies, it's between the supply chains they're part of. And if we've got vulnerabilities within our supply network, in terms of cyber, it can actually sink the whole network. And we've just heard, haven't we, EasyJet has had a big data breach there. They've had hackers. The problem is, if you're looking at this from a risk perspective, they're high impact events, and you might say the probability is, well, low, but it's getting higher, but the really hard to detect. So if you look at what the hackers did with Target, they accessed the systems, they just sat there for 3 months harvesting data, credit card data actually, before they started selling it on. So they had 3 months worth of stuff taking place, of data at that particular point. And so one of the key things is to actually start locking down the whole supply chain. And we have in the UK cyber essentials, and I'm encouraging procurement teams, supply chain professionals, make sure your supply chain partners have cyber essentials. You can even get this certified. You've got to start thinking differently about what's actually going on, because we've been devastated by a biological virus. The devastation, we've already been seeing the devastation which can be caused by, if you like, computer viruses. And if you think about the connectivity we're creating and everything else, everything's connected. I think about my house. If they could get something into, I'm sitting here at the moment. I've got I've got a pretty cool little studio here. Actually, I've got a proper streaming light going. I've got a webcam going. I've got all sorts of stuff going. All of a sudden, all that could be disrupted, and nothing's happening. So I think that yes, we need to think about our own personal cybersecurity. From just us at home, but actually more importantly, start asking questions. And it's not IT's responsibility; it's everybody's responsibility. Yeah. There's a great quote actually, which is quite funny. If I can remember it correctly, this is a super dangerous quote, which could go horribly wrong. Passwords are like underwear. You don't share it with anybody. You change it often. And I can't remember the other bit. But anyway, just think about that. You've got to keep changing them. Don't share them. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have to say, Richard, that half of the comments that have come through here have just been to congratulate you on the lecture, how much everyone has enjoyed it. So
well, that's half of them. So 50% are happy. Thank you very much.
I think and we're all going to go away with the underwear. I mean, that's going to be in our heads now.
Right, yeah.
Someone's asked, I think you kind of answered already, but has the pandemic created any positive change in business?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I was saying, I've been talking to a number, and they've been talking about, with every cloud, there's a bit of a silver lining. it has meant that people have started to really review and reflect on their processes and start to actually look for new ways of doing it. That, you know, this burning platform has really started to you know, change things quite dramatically. So I think that is one of the things. So, you know, I was on a call and there were a number of senior procurement people. There's another, you know, talking about, actually, you know, we found some amazing new ways of doing things which have increased productivity, have enabled us to do things differently, it's going to make our businesses more resilient.
One of the things that I was fascinated, well, there was lots of things I was fascinated about. My pencil was red hot whilst you were doing your lecture, I might say. Carmen, and the thing I love about Carmen is they're up to date. I mean, you know, we are all of a certain age, but the innovation is absolutely there amongst Carmen. When you're talking about your sort of goggles, you know, and looking at things,
yeah.
What kind of age? Is there a cut-off point, you know, that when you're doing your, because I know you advise BBC, you advise government, is there a sort of cut-off age that you kind of think there is no point because they're just never going to innovate in that way?
Well, I think one of the, you know, you could have said that, you know, oh, well, certain people won't pick up on these technologies. But if you think about Zoom, WhatsApp and everything else which is actually going on, you know, I was chatting to a elderly lady just down the road. She's she feeds the local hedgehogs, and she's persuaded me to feed the local hedgehogs as well. So we've been putting little hedgehog doors in all our fences and everything, and I've been watching the hedgehogs. But what's really interesting, she says, you know, she says, oh, I've started Zooming, you know, I've started Zooming. And she said, it did take me about, you know, 3 or 4 hours of my daughter getting very irate with me, shouting me down the phone. But I'm doing it now, and I really, you know, I'm really enjoying it, doing it. I also know of people who have been, you know, sort of workers have been working in some of the you know, elderly people who have been supporting, you know, the warehouse sectors and everything else, you know, audio picking, vision picking. Once they're used to it, they just love the technology. They really love the technology, and I think that that's going to be one of the things. I know that you know, you can get sort of a bit set in your ways, but this lockdown's been a great opportunity to learn new skills. You know, do new things. Here's a you know, I have a strange hobby, which is installing burglar alarms, right? And I, you know, it's just one of those hobbies. So I've done it for sort of family, friends, and everything else. Anyway, during lockdown, I've basically been going through Texacom, who's one of the big, you know, UK security alarm companies. They make everything in the UK in their factory in Yorkshire. Fantastic company. And what they've been running some fantastic courses on, like, installing burglar alarms and the technologies and everything else. So I've spent probably about 3 days just doing that type of stuff. And I think that what's really interesting about that is that, you know, I've learned a new skill. In fact, I've caused chaos with my local, my alarm in my house, and I've been disturbing the neighbours rather a lot because I thought I'd try out some of the things they told me, and I've had all the sounders going and everything else. But, you know, this is great. We can learn new skills. We've got a real opportunity because I think it's interesting to reflect on this. It's like all of a sudden we've had an enforced Sabbath on a lot of what we're doing. You know, you know, I sort of reflect on this. You know, we're meant to have 1 day off a week. Well, most of us don't have 1 day off a week, and now we've had, you know, after all these years, we've ended up with 7 or 8 weeks of doing stuff. So we've had to slow down, and that's actually making us think differently.
Graham Hayden, bless him. I'm going to mention him because he's a great mate of mine, and a wonderful Carmen who's helped put all this together. Now, coach firms, they're going to be tough for them because of this social distancing. But quite a lot of firms used to bring in their workforce, didn't they? Sort of out of London, used to bring them in by their own private hire coaches. Is that a way forward? Is that something that you've discussed?
Well, I mean, bringing in workers, I mean, we've got to sort of manage this. But I think it's interesting really looking at how people are adapting. But it's this whole challenge of cost to serve. I mean, for example, one of my neighbours had a delivery of a washing machine by Argos. The van arrived, and then there was a car behind it with the, because it was a 2-man delivery. So they had like the van and then the car, and both the driver and the guy, were separate, and then they worked on it together and moved it through. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the right solution for this type of stuff, but they're trying to manage that, social distancing and reducing contact. So, how we actually do that is going to be quite interesting. But I guess, if we start thinking about, we're hearing now that there's going to be tests available, antibody tests available and things like that. It might be that we're into a situation where we have to have a COVID test once a week to check that we're not, we're not in fact, I just don't know.
There's quite a sad note just come here from Peter Acton, who has just said that Shearings have announced tonight that they're going into administration.
Really? Yeah.
Wow, that's huge. I see Simon. Do you want to interrupt us, Simon?
No, I mean the light has come on my machine, and I've had a phone call from one of the organisers. I think we've probably come to the time, and I just want to give a huge thanks to a few people, and I don't know how it's appearing on other screens, but we've got That Way. A big thanks to Graham Cole, who has mediated the questions and answers very well this evening, and of course That Way on my screen to Richard for our wonderful lecture with some super points that you've raised, and you've obviously hit some notes here because we've had some great questions. But these things don't just get thrown together. So a big thanks to Richard Buswell and also to Clive Birch. And in the background, Lee Springthorpe, who has been operating the buttons and pulling the levers to put this thing together. We had a great virtual sermon from Hugh Mosford, our honorary chaplain, as the kickoff to our virtual events. This is another one. We've got some more that are coming down. So our next virtual event will be on the 3rd of June. And that's a piano recital from Curtis Bushell. Towards the end of the month, we have another Chaplain's Thought. And then around about the middle of July, we will have our virtual cart parade. Yeah. And then I know the team are putting together some other things to take us through this lockdown period until we can all meet again, which I hope is very soon.